Hello everyone, welcome back to our fun party in South France. Everybody around the world that's missing this party, tell them how wonderful it is. Was it wonderful? Yeah! We're having a little fun here in South France. So guys, next year, and by the way, the party next year will be in Paul's backyard, gorgeous Western Canada. That's where the party is now. And it's going to be super, mountains, cool with all the Paul's toys. So next year, last week in August approximately, new party, the Fractal Fractalfield.com conference, Verify conference will be in Western Canada. We're aiming. So fun stuff. And we're sorry that we had to turn away people 10 weeks before this started because it was so popular. But we're going to find a bigger venue and more fun and get our show together. So this particular lecture, as all you know, I'm Dan Winter, fractalfield.com, Verify.net, flameinmind.com. This lecture is entitled Longitudinal Scalar EMF, Path to Perfect Distribution Immortality. So basically, we want to know why this is really the mechanism of shareable waves. And last few days, we've been talking about what a longitudinal wave is and a little bit about why the term scalar and torsional may not be the correct word to describe longitudinal EMF. And many of you have seen those animations, but if we look at, actually Patrick had a really good one, but I have one here too that might be kind of fun. So just see if this makes some sense to you. So we really want to know what a longitudinal wave is. So here's the visual. Now, remember you've all seen these pictures. Notice how that wave, we're on the ocean and a molecule of water is going only in a circle. So you see this wave is going by, but each molecule is only going in a circle. Now the amount of that motion in that circle that's going back and forth like this is compressional. We're going to use the metaphor of the wave in the ocean to understand longitudinal. So the amount of inertia that's going back and forth like this is compressional and longitudinal, versus the amount of inertia, the amount of motion that's going up and down vertically, we call transverse. Now this is very important. You know, we're using water waves to understand as a metaphor for electromagnetic waves, which is very profound and lots of fun stuff. So all of your communications equipment, every Wi-Fi, all your toys, radio, everything, conventional electronics uses only this component, the transverse electromagnetic, for all of your radio, communications, telephones, everything's only using this. Because physics basically has no technology to send and pick up this, the longitudinal component of that electromagnetic wave, okay? So physics basically is mystified by what this is. An example of how mystified physics is about what longitudinal waves are is that longitudinal waves enable action at a distance very conveniently, except Einstein called action at a distance spooky because he didn't have a clue. But guess what? And I'm not picking on Einstein, he did some great work, but we're going to go into that. So then Bearden writes the book which proves by equation that longitudinal waves are gravity waves. Well, you'd think Einstein might have known, oh wait, he didn't know why an object falls to the ground, so maybe he didn't have a clue about that either. Do you see the connection? If you don't know why an object falls to the ground, you also don't know why action at a distance is possible. And so Einstein had some blind spots. Now, we're not here to criticize the poor guy because he did some fabulous work, but there's some serious holes, and that's what we're here to talk about. Anyway, so we want to find out how to get in the arrangement of local waves to get our electromagnetic inertia able to move this way compressionally instead of only this way in transverse. Obviously, every wave has some of both. But some waves are just going up and down locally, electromagnetically, and some waves are going longitudinally, compressionally, electromagnetically. The difference, when you go in a forest and you hear your ears ring and there's that magic crystalline silence and you can hear a sound from a mile away, you know that crystalline moment? That's because the waves got lined up longitudinally here. Okay? When you're in a city and there's noise everywhere and you can't even hear your neighbor shout, this is what's going on there, okay? So to get your waves lined up longitudinally, there's a certain discipline, a certain symmetry, a certain phase, certain vortex required. And that's the conversation we're going to have. Now, to think about this metaphor of how this works in water even more usefully, think about You know when they say, well, we just had this earthquake and the tsunami's traveling in the ocean at the wave is going at approximately the speed of a jet plane, around 600 miles per hour, the tsunami wave is going. But there's a boat right there and the boat doesn't even know it goes by. Right? You know why? Because the wave was traveling like this. Now this is a metaphor for the fact that the atoms around a longitudinal wave, like a Faraday cage, for example, the longitudinal wave goes right through it, doesn't care at all. So everybody's scratching their head when Ingo Swann is sitting there. He can very conveniently light the flame of a heated thermistor inside a Faraday cage at a distance with his mind every time in the lab. And they're sitting there, oh, it's magic, it's action at a distance, it's spooky, it's spooky. No, it's longitudinal wave mechanics and it's predictable and it's teachable. So this action at a distance is very important to understand. When the longitudinal wave crosses at a distance, they reconjugate and resynthesize the heat-containing component, which, for example, is the only real possible solution to plasma containment for all fusion reaction. The discovery of fusion energy depends entirely on when the dummies finally figure out longitudinal interferometry, which is that we're going to get into that in the next lecture, because that's also the solution to our extraterrestrial history problems, which is the title of my next lecture. Okay? But we were back here, which is with the ocean wave going so fast, 600 miles per hour, and the boat doesn't notice that it went by. So how come, 10,000 people died in the Boxing Day tsunami? Well, what happened is the transverse compressional wave is going along at 600 miles per hour in the tsunami, and now here's the shoreline. The shoreline looks like one side of a cone. Okay? Now the compressional inertia hits the shoreline like one side of the cone, and the compressional inertia going like this, suddenly, doop, doop, doop. So it translates the vorticity. The yellow brick road to Oz? No, the spiral on the cone, optimized translation of vorticity, is how you translate the longitudinal, in this case, to the transverse. And then, now that the wave is going up and down as it hits shore, how many 100,000 people died? So that's an interesting metaphor to start the conversation, to using water as a metaphor. Because we want to get to the point where we can understand then how this is the only way through death. I repeat, how and why this is the only way through death. That's the question on the table. Let's see here. So most of you have seen this. This was my keynote slide for last year's lecture. This was the basis of my lecture last year, which is saying, if you send the up and down wave onto a cone, that inertia going up and down is translated in vorticity with the perfected golden spiral on the cone, which is the cone head. This became the CAD-CAM design for the vortex imploder, for imploding water, which is what we did in CAD-CAM after 10 years work. And now that's in 20 countries, and that is the subject of my third lecture. And Lawrence worked with us. So when you take the transverse wave down here, called optimized translation of vorticity, you happen to see the 5-10 spirals on the perfect cone, which we now know is proven by my equation to be the structure of hydrogen and how DNA works. So that becomes a map to what's called the caduceus and the essence of phase conjugation. The up and down inertia is translated non-destructively and converted into compressional. It's like a squirt gun, literally. And the nozzle of that squirt gun has the diameter of Planck length and time. And that's where there's a pressure release, because charge distribution is enabled there, because Planck is a musical key signature that is the same 1,000 light years in all directions. Hello, somebody agreed on something. They call that evidence for the Big Bang, but it's more than that. That agreement is the nature of gravity itself, and that's what we want to get to here. But anyway, so the inertia went in up and down, and the inertia comes out this way. Now when you set up these vortex with opposing cones called four-wave mixing phase conjugation, you convert the transverse local electromagnetic to long-distance traveling longitudinal EMF. And this translation of vorticity becomes the basis of gravity research. And the next subject we want to cover is why only the longitudinal component actually is the mechanism of healing. That's what we really want to understand in this conversation. But first, just to give you some idea of the gravitational nature of this, you know this famous, it's called the EM propulsion drive, and you have a cavity that's kind of trapezoidal. It's a metallic cavity, and they bounce a microwave in there, and the microwave bounces like this. Hint, does that look like a caduceus waiting to happen? If you bounce the microwave in that, they produce gravity. And there's this big controversy in NASA, and oh, by the way, the EM drive actually flies, okay? Well, why does it make gravity? Well, my equation predicts how to tune that thing, so this will reach the kissing pine cones accurately at the Planck threshold. So we believe our gravity research team could radically improve this device because we have the equations to prove it. It would many things. So, it's important to talk about the nature of gravity because it's centripetal, it's negentropic, it's self-organizing, it's universal, and it's identical with the nature of consciousness itself. So if you don't know why an object falls to the ground, you're in trouble for lots of reasons. Sorry, Mr. Einstein, but you didn't get it. So currently they call the most expensive device to do this, LIGO, laser interferometry, gravitational wave observatory, and they say, we're measuring gravity waves. Oh, how wonderful. We only spent a couple $1 billion and we're going to measure gravity. Oh, cool. Okay, fine. So how did you measure gravity? Oh, well, we measured gravity wave. We set up lasers over here and then 3,000 lasers away, another laser, and we measure change in distance. Oh, is that really what you're measuring? Change it? Oh, well, let's see what's happening. Oh, well, one laser goes to one end and the other end. You measure the time it takes for the laser to bounce back. And we call that distance. But actually, they're measuring time. Okay? Now, when the two pairs of identical billion-dollar facilities, 3,000 miles apart, when they measure and the difference between the two facilities increases one day, they say, well, a gravity wave just went through. Oh, good, we proved Einstein, ain't it cool? We measured gravity. No, you measured time. And now what is time? Well, actually, Einstein called it bending space-time. And this is unfortunate because space-time doesn't bend, actually. And we don't want to pick on anybody here, but the actual physics of the situation is that what the universe is made of is very simple. It's a compressible media named charge, which propagates like a superfluid. And when a wave propagates in the superfluid, compression, rarefaction, and charge, sometimes called plus and minus charge, sometimes called yin and yang after Roger. Didn't you name that, Roger? Oh, no. So when a wave travels in the superfluid, if it doesn't rotate, it doesn't anything. But if it rotates, then it stores some inertia. And we name that mass. So charge rotation is the only origin and definition of mass because inertia is the only definition of mass. So that gyroscopic inertia of rotating charge we named mass. So we called it a particle, but it's actually a slipknot wave of charge rotating. Very simple. Well, that's pretty, most people can get that. Everybody now knows that the idea of a particle was actually insanity. I mean, the very concept of particle is absolute insanity. It's just like people who believe that gravity and electromagnetism are made of different stuff. Just let them go to the insane asylum and don't pick on them because really it's messy. Okay? The concept of a particle was inherently insane, just like the concept that gravity and electromagnetism were different stuff. That's schizophrenia defined. So now that charge is rotating, and you measure the rate of rotation called the period, and we name that time. So yes, if you accelerate your gold watch, close to the speed of light, it's going to change its spin rate, which you named time. But time is only spin rate. Okay, back to LIGO. So when you measured these two lasers slightly different, 3,000 miles apart, and you called it a gravity wave, the only thing you actually measured was a slight difference in spin rate. Oh, well now. So you're calling a gravity wave spin rate. Okay, well, let's see what Tom Bearden called it. Tom Bearden wrote the equations. I mean, this guy really had to show it. We all knew him well. He had health troubles in his old age, but he really was a pioneer, really. And so, gravitobiology, does that give you a clue? The longitudinal wave is the gravity wave, and the longitudinal wave, gravito, is the mechanism of biology. The answer's in the title, man. equations are there. I mean, it's there. So if you want the technical physics of why the longitudinal waves are gravity, buy the book, which comes with a CD, and it's not even expensive. So basically, he's saying then, Tom Bearden was also the hero of the priori plasma research, which was the underpinnings and inspiration for Therify.net. And he also very, very clearly articulated that only by making the longitudinal wave was priori actually creating some healing. So that would then be the physics of Therify, and so we do need to talk about that. But first, my friend Greg Hodowanik and Bill Ramsey, really sweet guys, they bought a 25-cent capacitor, and they did a whole lot better than Weber's $1 billion or like. I mean, they just did better. It was a 25-cent capacitor. Hello. No, we didn't need the $1 billion. 25 cents will do fine. Thank you very much. It's called a Rust. It's called a Rust track recorder. And here's this gravity wave coming in. And yes, a star explodes. A couple hundred light years away. The gravity wave arrives. Oh yes, much faster than the speed of light, no problem. Measured it, graphed it. The whole work is done. I mean, it's very cool work. And all it is capacitive coupling. If you make an array of capacitors correct that can collect a longitudinal wave, okay, let's go to the Princeton Noosphere project, the heroes of Heart Math Institute. Princeton Noosphere, they say when 1 million people feel the same emotion, we're going to get a squiggle on our graph. Oh, well, what made the squiggle on the graph? Oh, the collective unconscious. Oh, cool, Princeton Noosphere project. And I said, well, what's your transducer made of? Oh, well, it's a Josephson junction. What's inside that? Oh, capacitive coupling. Okay, so on 9/11, when 100 million people had the same emotion, they got a big squiggle on their graph. We made a big longitudinal wave. Collective emotion worked. It was measurable. They called it Josephson junction. I call it capacitive coupling, picking up a longitudinal wave. Okay, so whatever sends that compressional wave is the mechanism of the collective unconscious, and actually the Ka from the Ba, the communion of saints, it's all that kind of charge distribution efficiency. It's really very useful conversation. So this we talked about before. So when Raymond Chow measured the speeds faster than light, called quantum tunneling sometimes, which really means quantum embedding, which really means quantum conjugation. The dominant measure of all of his measures of speeds faster than light were from 1.5 to 1.7 times the speed of light. My theory of gravity requires that be centered around 1.618 times the speed of light, and you see, we're in the window, man. So, this was my humble, it's called The Symptoms of Einstein-Induced Insanity. And on the top of the list is not having a clue why objects fall to the ground. It really is a problem. I mean, physicists should at least be embarrassed. I mean, they should be, really. Please, be embarrassed, will you, Mr. Physicist? Okay. And thinking that the speed of light is a speed limit. Longitudinal waves go with harmonics of Golden Ratio faster than the speed of light all the time. They're in this network grid. Yes, see, that's the other thing we forgot to mention. In the previous slide, important to mention, the reason the universe is fractal and the universe is dodeca, because this Golden Ratio nodal interferometry is the mechanism of the propagation of longitudinal waves. Remember when Bruce Cathy measured dramatic difference in nuclear radiation's critical mass depending on whether you're on or off that grid. Why? Because the compressional wave, it defines critical mass. Okay, it's what makes it centripetal, actually. So obviously, I was there. I was in his living room with Keshe when TEPCO called him from Japan. And they said, yes, what's the Japanese disaster? Fukushima. So the TEPCO calls, we just tested it. We took some of the monoatomic material, put it on and by the way, the radiation went down. I was there when TEPCO called Keshe. And so, and we're going to show the slide where we learn the physics of why that was the primary function of the Ark of the Covenant, which was to reduce radioactivity. That's why the Syrians built it. And because the Anunnaki were so stupid, they couldn't get through the Van Allen belts without nuking their way through. So they had have something to hold the nukes. But that's another story. But the reason that the Ark of the Covenant reduces radioactivity measurably is related to why focused human attention reduces radioactivity measurably, as Uri Geller measured, actually. So not only does focused human attention cause electric charge to compress, it reduces radioactivity measurably. So the same question applies to each issue. What made it centripetal? So this is the nodal array of the longitudinal, and we were finishing the Einstein conversation. So the two Einstein-induced instead, not having a clue why objects fall to the ground. They fall to the ground because fractal perfected charge compression, golden ratio recursive constructive heterodyning of phase velocities, produces the acceleration of charge towards symmetry center named the gravity. Note, acceleration of charge is gravity. I mean, Einstein even agreed if there's no experiment that could differentiate acceleration from gravity. In fact, acceleration is gravity. What's causing the acceleration is the gravity. So if you're going up in an elevator and you feel more gravity, you can't do any experiment that differentiates that from gravity itself. Okay? So if you can predict what causes acceleration, you know what causes gravity, and therefore you know why an object falls to the ground, something Einstein couldn't figure out. And what causes charge to accelerate towards center is golden ratio recursive constructive heterodyning of phase velocities, which I then proved is why the structure of hydrogen is that picture of golden spiral. That's why and how hydrogen has gravity. So also thinking the speed of light was a speed limit was a dumb idea. Thinking it takes infinite energy to go through the speed of light. This is another symptom of Einstein-induced insanity. Thinking all action at a distance is spooky, which was Einstein's name for action at a distance. That's another symptom. In fact, longitudinal interferometry, in fact, does action at a distance routinely and works very well with Therify. And we know now Therify plasma systems work better placed at Earth grid magnetic line crosses. For the same reason you can only have a labyrinth work, a temple work, a cathedral work, a nuclear reactor work. You can only make phone calls to ancestors. You can only do all of those things if you know how to dowse and find where a magnetic line crosses. I always use the example. I was there in Belgium when they located the Kozyrev mirror, which hundreds of times they proved they have military quality telepathy thousands of miles apart. This is Korotkov's work with Kozyrev. And first, they get out their little nanotesla magnetometer and measure they need a certain number of nanoteslas of magnetic flux density where the Earth magnetic line crosses before you can plant the microwave cylinder called Kozyrev mirror. The microwave is actually the mechanism of the telepathy. So, aligning with these nodal line crosses allows the action at distance. So, for example, if you want your Agnihotra to work, for example, you do it at a certain, not only do you do it exactly at sunrise, sunset, and remember they measured the reduced death rate to nuclear fallout in places where Agnihotra was done. And I was also there in Poland where we created a whole Garden of Eden with Agnihotra. Plasma fire, capacitive pyramid, and alignment with the perfect four directions called sunrise, sunset, otherwise called four-wave mixing and phase conjugation, you see? So all of these things now tell you how to do action at a distance with things like Therify. Use a magnetic line cross, sunrise, sunset. You see what these things do? They produce that alignment which allows, and then if the sender and receiver are both at similar magnetic nodes, you see what that does? Sets up that DNA radio. So, also issue of Einstein not having a clue what the ether is made of. It's a compressible superfluid whose compression rarefaction is charge. Incorrectly and weirdly somehow believing that space-time is somehow bent. Bad term, actually. The path of the curvature, the path of charge is curved. Very simple. The path of the charge is bent. Now, we're going to talk more about that. Not understand that both mass and time are simply defined and created simply by charge rotation. Charge rotation defines mass and time. So let's have a Sufi koan to explain the physics. Please? Sufis say, only love bends the light. Remember, bends the light? Therefore, only love creates. Now you, unlike Einstein, know exactly the physics. If the path of charge is bent, it can then rotate. and that creates mass. Creates mass. This is good. This is physics 101, actually. Love is actually the path of perfect embedding. So, from another famous Sufi named Winter, oh, that's me, said, mass is created by the centripetal force, gravity charge implosion, which perfect conjugate fractal embedding, low-fi long wave, love, low-fi long wave, creates, okay? So when your heart turns inside out recursively, you implode in the bed, I would turn myself inside out for you, darling. So you implode and you embed, and you bend the light. So you see why the Sufis say only love bends the light? Only embedding bends the light, because that's what creates the vortex of centripetal force. And you could talk about this plasma physics of the universe in emotional terms very usefully. So, we saw this before, that in physics, if you ask a laser optics guy who invented phase conjugation, where they measured neg entropy, self-organization, and time reversal for the first time, you ask him how he arranged his lasers with angstrom level accuracy, and at this point here, called the phase conjugate mirror, think John Dee and Nostradamus, because we're going there next. Okay? So the phase conjugate mirror here was a super high dielectric material, lithium niobate, barium strontium titanate, phase conjugate mirror, magic mirrors. It's all done with mirrors. God's bumper sticker. So phase conjugation happens when lasers do this, and they create this charge implosion here, which is the possibility of symmetric longitudinal compression. Now, let's think about why inside your body there's something that hurts. Why would a longitudinal wave help? Let's use the example. I should have the slide here. I didn't bring it. But Gerald Smith, who wrote the book on Therapy that Paul mentioned, had done beautiful work. He used infrared to measure that Therapy was so useful in swelling reduction. Measured, relatively documented. And what is swelling reduction? Restored compression. What is restored compression? A centripetal force. Okay, so now obviously if I've got some complex geometric like the Star Mother kit, I forgot to bring the model, sorry, yeah, I'll bring it later. But if you got a complex geometry like the body and you want to restore compression, if you got waves coming in from both sides that are doing this, and you're the central geometry, is that going to restore centripetal force? Heck no, it ain't going to happen. No, but if you get opposite wave fronts coming in like this, like you couldn't get a better squeeze, the logo of a well-designed tomato juicer. and so when the compression waves come in like this, 180 degrees out of phase, perfect symmetry, squeeze, boom, squeeze, boom, squeeze, boom, and here, squeeze, boom. So if you squeeze from the sides symmetrically, you restore implosive compression, okay? And you can do that with a longitudinal, and you have no chance with a transverse. So then later when Paul explains to you that the Tesla coil, I learned something new from Paul, recent conversations about this actually, that the Tesla coil it's called bifiller, which means two opposite ends, 185. But the Tesla coil is designed that the convergence of high voltage waves at the end specifically dumps out the longitudinal component, which then follows that white wire at 500,000 volts in the corona around the wire. So the wave traveling along in corona around that white wire is actually primarily longitudinal. So that component, not the up and down component, the compression component has been filtered, has gone through the pine cone, imploded, and become centripetal longitudinal. Okay, so that's the story of Therapy, and we referred to this before. Remember when Patrick was talking about 30, 50, 80? Here, 30, 50, 80. This is my equation, Golden Ratio powers of Planck, right here. Those are the frequencies, right here. Okay, and these are the frequencies Priori used, which he got from Lakowski and Tesla and Rife. Actually, Lakowski and Tesla and Rife, this was a whole lineage of people working together. And these are the frequencies that Antoine Priori famously used in South France in his plasma tubes, who did not know that phase conjugation existed. Did not know that you needed two tubes with opposing harmonics to conjugate to actually make longitudinal, and did not know what a longitudinal wave was. But he spent millions of dollars on each device, and he got some of the frequencies right. So, the day that we looked and found these frequencies behind the work of Antoine Priory in South France, French government documents thousands of cancers healed. Antoine Priory. This is no arbitrary, this is well documented. They got frustrated because each one cost millions of bucks and no one knew the principle. That's my bumper sticker right there. No one knows the principle, so they can't use it. Oops. Teach the pure principle and live forever. So, the day that we saw this chart here of the Priory frequencies and saw this connection is the day we started building the Therify, Paul and I. Actually, that's how that happened. That was the day it happened. We saw that's the beginning of Therify right here, Antoine Priory. And Chris Bird, who I knew very well, was at Priory. He gave me the first French book on Priory. I mean, we've known about Priory for 30 years. And Bearden talks about almost nothing else. I mean, these guys knew that this. And Priory had dramatic growth effect in lentil plants and all kinds of great growth effects. We were just telling about if you want to hear the story, talk to David at the Nashville, Tennessee Therify Center. The flower shop across the street has double the life of their flowers, you know, because the centripetal force is what makes the seed grow. The seed actually, the difference between a live seed and a dead seed really sucks. I mean, no, it's the ability to suck in charge that determines whether the seed can attract the next nutrient. So the seed is not electrically implosive, it's dead. So the electrical engineer's definition of life versus death is, does it implode charge? And that turning inside out is what turns a zygote into a fetus. So this is the chart of, if you go to the medical literature and you find all the studies in the medicine, thousands and thousands of studies of various electrical frequencies that heal cancer. You review thousands of studies in the medical literature. You come up with a list of the frequencies that have been documented to heal cancer. Oh, that's fine. Okay. So the center point of the measurements always were 341.2 hertz. My equation says, this is my equation here. My equation says 342. But look at this. This is what I think is so cool. About maybe several hundred, a large number of those studies said the frequency most useful in reducing cancer symptoms was 50 hertz. Now, doesn't that ring your chimes? Here's my equation, exact golden ratio exponents of Planck, 49.968 hertz, okay? So the most commonly mentioned frequency for healing cancer is 50 hertz. Well, I just want to tell you a little story. So my partner for really very advanced carbon nano, you know, when we get our carbon nano production going, 32 times stronger than steel and replaces all energy and all propulsion on the planet, and 80% of the industry on the planet is obsolete that day. Talk about disruptive technology. I mean, most other things are boring by comparison. But anyway, so I'm having this conversation with Carl. I'm saying, well, if you want to make the carbon grow like a flower, and by the way, it's called the way it looks is called buckyball. We talked about Buckminster fullerene. The hottest subject of study in all of chemistry for many years, Buckminster fullerene. So you make carbon grow like a dodecaecosa, like a flower. And what do you need, Carl? Oh, we need an electric field. Okay, yep. And we were doing some research on that. Okay, Carl, yeah. And we found out something interesting. We said, North America is screwed. What do you mean, Carl? Well, they're using 60 hertz over there. Sorry. The biggest multi-billion-dollar industry possible on planet Earth is not possible in the countries using 60 hertz. Sorry, it's already proven. You want to make this magic stuff, carbon nano, and save the world, man? Propulsion, energy, everything. If you got 60 hertz, forget it. You can't start. 50 hertz? Hello, Europe. So at least we have culture over here. Embed or die. That's what I say. All right. So this is the graph of. This is the frequencies that Elizabeth Rauscher used in a magnetic coil to eliminate pain in a very expensive FDA study. And thank you, Elizabeth Rauscher. And she's an old friend, maybe one of the most famous physicists in the world, who just recently died, actually. Long story. But anyway, the frequencies she used to reduce pain, documented by the FDA, here's the peaks. Okay? Here's her peaks. Here's my equation. You get what I'm saying. The magnetic field that reduces pain is conjugate, implosive, and negentropic. And this, you've seen this before. So this is... There are only two frequencies that make photosynthesis happen. Notice very narrow peaks. If you want photosynthesis, you're going to need this frequency and this frequency. Everything else is poison, basically. Okay, hello. For example, green. Every plant spits out the green photon because it can't conjugate, it can't compress, it can't be life. So the green photon gets spit out. It's poison to life. Okay? It's called negative green, etc. But look, exactly 137 times a golden ratio to the exponent 137 times Planck is 691 nanometers. Hello? And 136 is 427 nanometers. Exactly. I mean, very precisely. So we have absolute proof photosynthesis is phase conjugate negentropic charge collapse. That's what it is. And the chlorophyll molecule is a mirror image of the hemoglobin molecule. Let's just say they got one little magnesium in the middle, but the whole thing is the same whistles and bells. It's all the same baby. So hello, what's happening in your blood when you get the right light? Hemoglobin, right? So when we do our lecture on the imploder vortex technology, we have 3 new imploder technologies we're announcing at this conference, which is my 3rd lecture. We're going to introduce Jeff Heisey. He's here. A little smile. Jeff was brave enough. He dug up the LEDs, fit the equation, built the right LEDs in a helix to fit on the nozzle of the imploder, and got what kind of growth rate?
I'd say easily 30 to 40% increase.
30 to 40% increase in growth in plants measured. You apply these frequencies into the water and dump that on the plant. Talk about teaching the principle. And you don't need to patent anything. You build it and sell it, and they will come. Right? So if you discover the principle of life, you don't need to prove it to anyone. You just simply deliver the service, and that's what this does. So we're going to talk more about that. And this is a really lovely conversation about the physics of the origin of color. I'm not sure we have the ambition to go there right now, but basically the visible spectrum is an octave, and if you plot the wavelengths of the primary colors on the curve of that octave, you get the phase angle of tilt of the photon. And the photon tilt that you call orange and violet are precisely 45 and 135 degrees. And green, we know, is a 90-degree tilt. That's why it's opposite conjugate. So it doesn't compress, it doesn't implode. But look, what's really super cool here, the blue and the yellow, that's the only tilt angles of the photons named color that are not cubic. What are the angles? Oh, 63 and 117 degrees. Guess what the inner and outer angle of the face of a dodecahedron is? Isn't that cool? 63 and 117 degrees. So the photon donuts line up to face the faces of the dodecahedron, and they get sorted at that center, and it's called rainbows. So phase conjugation is the reason color exists. And there's lots of physics, there's fun stuff. Okay, now this slide is a preview because in my next lecture, we're going to describe the Mercury vortex and the understanding the propulsion physics behind the Vimana and the Nazi bell, and why understanding that cause of gravity could help us emerge from our difficulties of extraterrestrial politics. And that's in the next lecture. But in this lecture, where we're going now is, don't you love these pictures? Can you see that from there? Just had an auto accident. It's in the woods, and it's very vivid. I mean, there's the ghost. There are thousands of these pictures out. The guy just died, and there he is. Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. And this also here, there's a ghost. I mean, if you search on the internet, you get thousands of these pictures. This is not a joke. This is not, Photoshop. No, this is physics.
Are you showing that?
Oh yeah, there's 1,000 of these pictures out there. Okay, so Korotkov analyzes these ghosts. Now, we want to do the electrical engineering of that. That's our interest at the moment. We want to understand this electrical engineering. Remember when we said, first of all, notice, if this were in the big city, I don't think you would have seen that. You know why? because you need a charge-conditioned environment for charge distribution efficiency for the longitudinal interferometry to work. The same physics of why you will never see these beautiful orbs that you see around trees and nature and people having bliss. You get an aluminum and steel building, forget it. You're not going to see the plasma. And not only is it about not seeing the ghost, it's about the fact that that ghost is going to have a problem.
If it sticks around.
Well, that ghost, if it is not in a charged permissive environment, remember how angry the Hopis got when the American government decided they were going to put steel sewage pipes in the sacred burial ground at Old Aribe. I mean, there was a riot. They knew how their ancestral memory worked, and they were not going to allow that US government to put steel and aluminum in their sacred burial ground. They were not. And they didn't. And now we understand the physics, and they were right. Okay, so the opportunity to have access to the collective unconscious and successful death depends on a charge distribution permissive environment. You know, in Switzerland, they put a hole in the top of the roof for grandma to leave when she dies. It's well known. But you wouldn't bother in the city. Sorry. Okay, so you need a certain kind of environment. Now what this means is that this is a longitudinal compressional geometry which has been accelerated from the body. And if you have a coherent death, which unfortunately this probably wasn't. So the importance of a coherent death. So we want to know how an electrical engineer would plan to make this more coherent. That's the question on the table at the moment. Now, I'm an electrical engineer. I'm planning to make that more coherent for me. You know, be fun. So, let's use the example of the process of mummification. So, I got this natron salt, famous on the Egyptian plateau. And natron salt, it reminds me of the time when Vincent Bridges, our old friend, was emphasizing, well, yes, they sold mummy powder in every pharmacy in Europe for 300 years. I said, okay, Vincent, that's an interesting historical anecdote. Every pharmacy in Europe for 300 years sold mummy powder. Okay, why, Vincent? Well, he said, mummy powder had a very high component of Orme's gold powder emulet. Okay, there was gold powder. I said, you mean all those Egyptians were eating all that gold powder? And Vincent actually never answered that question. There were a lot of questions he didn't answer. But then I thought to myself, well, you know, when they uncovered the place in the pyramid where Moses had been doing all his work, they found a pile of white sand, gold powder, right? Moses was a gold powder cook. That's how the Essenes made their money, actually. So what was happening here? Oh, okay, I place this natron salt around the flesh and it transmutes the flesh to an Ormes-like gold powder. That's proven. Nobody can argue. That's fact. Okay? But now, why? It's not, the purpose of having a mummy is not to turn your flesh and blood into gold powder. That's like maybe a little bit boring. No. The reason is because this implosive capacitance could alchemically drive the charge coherence down the light cone through Planck, igniting the longitudinal field of the aura, which the Egyptians called, I didn't write this correctly, the Egyptians called the coherence of the transverse EMF, they called it your Ka, which is the coherence of your conventional aura. But what emerges from the coherent aura, the Ka, the Egyptians called the Ba, the Kaaba, and the Kaaba is Merkaba. And the Ba is the component that became longitudinal and went through the speed of light and became a successful ghost, able to propagate longitudinally. So actually, the purpose of mummification is to add coherence, longitudinal coherence, to the imploding aura, actually. Which we know, the Egyptians were right. If Osiris, which is really Enki, if he didn't go into the sun, the Nile wouldn't flood correctly the next year, and they had the correct physics, actually. We now know if 1 million children sing the same song, we've measured 11 different times the change in the solar flares. So, you know, a million children singing the same song, the sun goes, ah, I like that. Actually, that's the sun's response. It's been measured 11 times. This is fact. So we make something centripetal stars need. DNA, stars didn't make DNA for...
Dan, is that why the saints, successful saints, the bodies don't decompose for hundreds of years?
Thank you for introducing the next slide. No, exactly. Thank you. Yeah, really. No, you know, I jumped ahead of everybody else's slide, so please do it to me. It's okay. It's all done with mirrors. No, but yes. So in Tibet, the process of perfect shrink. First of all, it's well known. They call it the rainbow body, but we actually have many videos. When the Tibetan saint dies, there's rainbows. This is physics. We physics people should know why you have rainbows when Tibetan saints die, because it's been observed so many times. Excuse me, this is not arbitrary. No, this is physics. So, but now that you know the cause of rainbows, you already know why a good death makes rainbows, don't you? Do you? Have you figured it out? You added centripetal force to your environment, and that charge implosion is what sorts the light. It bent the light. Okay? So they call it the rainbow body here, but now here they're depicting what they call green lion, red lion in Tibet, which is the perfect shrinking process. So here, that guy shrank. He compressed his charge envelope, and I believe he probably did succeed in adding coherence to the charge inertia of the longitudinal EMF of his ghost. I think he probably succeeded, actually. I'm not saying this is the best way to do it, but it's obvious the physics here. The physics is if you can implode the charge, you can take it with you. Hey, that's better than a bank, right? So this is what I was talking about. Is Paul here? Paul's here. Oh, good. I have a question prepared for you, Paul. Hang on. Okay. George Tsoukalos, a famous ancient alien guy, he's really fun. He asserts that the Zohar's Ancient of Days was mistranslated in what was the mana machine used with the Ark of the Covenant. And the correct translation was the transportable one with the tanks. Okay, we have the picture, you know. And then one day, Paul was telling me, well, you know what the tanks were used for? He said there's a shaggy red algae growth which feeds on the gold, making it soluble into the showbread called mana, which makes it digestible. You want to tell us anything more about the shaggy red?
Well, any life form, plants and bacteria and things, that what they're doing is breaking down minerals. They're feeding on the minerals.
They're feeding in.
They're literally eating them and breaking them down.
If you get the right algae that likes gold, then the gold will emerge from that algae in a more soluble form, which is edible.
Yeah, absolutely. Even the plants, they're feeding on the minerals. We can't eat the minerals directly. They're not soluble in our system. The plants break them down fine enough that we get the benefits of the plant.
Mana in the desert. And actually then I believe you indicated, Paul, that the baking of that bread, the heat would burn off the residual sulfur, leading a good tasting, super nourishable, edible showbread. Holy Communion. This is the origin of Holy Communion. It was served in round white wafers. At Rennes-le-Chateau, you'll see the picture of pine cones. It was served in a pine cone shape. This was a total service city of the dead, Rennes-le-Chateau. Okay, so, and now you can understand why this reduced radioactivity so dramatically. The layers of acacia wood and the golden ratio, gold acacia wood layers interdigitated would create the implosive capacitance. And that's why this was primarily designed as a container for the nukes of the Anunnaki. That's the original purpose. But then, and this was called the mercy seat, because it was very high voltage here, a spark gap. And the plasma here required extreme hygiene, which only a few of the priests understood. And it would kill you if you the sparks. Okay, and in fact, what few people know is the Ark of the Covenant, the good ones, had to be, there were more than one. They had to be stored on Earth magnetic lines. And now you know why. Right? Because they wouldn't build charge properly. So we believe now that in well, in the Azores, but there's we know where these were used and why, actually. So we talk more, and then we draw the analogy to what Naschie tried to do. Naschie actually knew some nuclear physics, but he really didn't know any electrical engineering. That was a major catastrophe. but the monoatomic stuff does have some useful functions. So, physics classes of present science should begin with we, the physics community, offer the sincerest apologies. We don't understand. Okay. All physics professors, please apologize now. Thank you very much. We don't need any unnecessary humility here. So, what is the storal to the Mori? We need a storal to the Mori. Gravity is the most essential force, and if you understood the cause of gravity, you can understand consciousness, electronegativity, and photosynthesis. But if you don't know the cause of gravity, you can't understand anything, nothing. So if you didn't start by learning why an object falls to the ground, which we did, you couldn't understand any of the other stuff. It's really kind of sad. So that's why I think it's a bit. And then the other tragedy. Here's the other tragedy. So the same physicists who really do not have a clue, well, I'd say without a clue why objects fall to the ground, are the same physicists who say that the universe is all doing entropy. That is, the universe is condemned to chaos. Hello, I think you guys are really fatalists, you know? No, there is a path out of chaos called neg-entropy, self-organization. It's generated by phase conjugate. It's been measured in physics many times, phase conjugate optics, self-organization. So the universe is not condemned to disorder. Hello, there's a path out. It's called neg-entropy. And it's caused by phase conjugation. Oh, which also causes gravity. Oh, well, if you don't know what one is, you see the problem in conventional physics. And we're not picking on anybody, but we really got to fix this or we're in trouble. Now, I was going to go with the story about, this was a conversation, I did a lecture on the physics of vision. And what I was saying is that the cause of vision was actually the same centrifugal force. So that lecture show here, like here's the slide about how focused human attention, vision, causes charge to compress measurably. And here's the slide where you see the harmonics in the brain wave. So this is a university lecture I did earlier this year to an invited group of several thousand, actually, optometrists, actually. And so I was saying why phase conjugation is a cause of vision. And I was using the example, this is flameinmind.com, and this is me on the day that I discovered it was working. And I had a little bliss. And indeed, I made 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 golden ratio brainwave harmonics. And this is charge implosion. And I didn't sustain it for very long. And I didn't make it up to Tibetan Gamma, incidentally, but I had a little fun. And so I charge imploded for a moment. And this is advanced stuff. I have pretty deep theta, and I do consistently have deep theta. And I do have, they say this means access to the collective unconscious, and I think they're right. Because when you build deep theta, you can get access to secrets. It's pretty cool. But where this starts is so easy in flameinmind.com is the day that you learn how to make alpha, as they say, is the day the alcoholic finds the next drink of beer uncomfortable. Because when you can make your alpha, then you can generate your own bliss, and the addiction was only the wrong turn on the right road to bliss. So that's why on the day that the alcoholic learns to make some alpha, and there's fun ways to teach it, flameinmind.com, audio cues, binaurals, beautiful stuff. That's a powerful cure to addiction. And that's how I started learning about brainwave science, was addiction research with my teacher, Marty Wuttke, and you can find him on the web, martywuttke.com. So the point of this whole lecture, the optometrist, was that this phase conjugation is the cause of peak perception. Implosion is the cause of vision. And when I close my eyes and I'm lying on a ley line, and we have one in our house that's quite distinct, I can see this ball of light above. And I can ask just about any question and get answers, really. It's true. And I've recently had some amazing communication with the Andromedans, which we might chat about later, but that's for another day. Anyway, I think I'm out of time.
Is that a possible explanation then for the blind vision?
Well, yes, thank you. Thank you, Paul. So the famous World Without Blindness projects in Russia, and then in many countries now. Yes. Oh, great. Yes. The world. Yes. Well, so this. Thank you for bringing that up. So Korotkov went to the World Without Blindness project, and his only job, I have the slide here, his only job was to measure the kids who were able to see without their eyes. And his measurements showed the best, fastest way to measure whether someone was going to be able to see without their eyes was whether they made golden ratio in their brainwaves. And I have the chart here, I think. Where did I put that? Oh, that'd be fun. So that's the first time the literature actually published. Right slide, wrong slide. Korotkov's notes. I'm sorry. But so Korotkov did like 5 different analyses, and it was fractality in the aura and golden ratio in the brainwave. But the best, fastest way to measure whether a young person could see without their eyes was to check their brainwaves for golden ratio from alpha to beta or alpha to theta, actually. So what's happening? Why is that inner vision? You make charge implodes. And when you make charge implodes, what do? You turn on the lights. And I did that study for years. I was doing alpha trials, and only about a few people in 10 can actually make some alpha. The human race is at a low level. I'm sorry, but they got some work to do. But that's why the good ETs, what's the good ETs who are teaching alpha for brainwaves, the Pontes. The Pontes.
Yeah, small grays.
The small
grays.
And they've made it their mission to teach humans how to make alpha, and I applaud that. I think that's great. So here's the small grays. There's hundreds of them. It's a long story. But they've decided, well, the first thing we've got to do is teach these humans how to make alpha. Why? Because that's the beginning of telepathy. Why is it the beginning of telepathy? Because if you can't be a telepath, you're not regarded as civilized in their world, actually. And why? So I did this study. Everyone who could make alpha, I says, do you see light when you close your eyes? And invariably, if someone is making alpha, their answer is yes. And if they're not making an alpha, their answer is no. So it's very simple. The beer drinker drinks the beer to increase the conductivity so he can make some alpha. Why? So he can turn the lights on. So on the day when you teach him how to make some alpha, he doesn't want any beer because the lights are already on. It isn't even complicated. And that plasma ball we call the light is the information of the collective mind, actually. And that's why you need to align that longitudinally to get that DNA radio working. So, any questions? I'm out of time. Yes?
Just a quick thing verifying what you just said. Had the experience in a lava tube in Haleakala
Nice.
many years ago. Total darkness. We went far enough, turned off the little caver lights, and some of the group started freaking out. So I started creating alpha theta with overtone chanting. And all of a sudden, there was light everywhere. It was extraordinary.
That's great.
That's exactly what you're saying.
Well, the lava tube was probably highly piezoelectric. So it responded to the entrainment, and the alpha is Schumann.
Yes, and it's easy for anybody to create that instantly by toning or chanting or overtone chanting, especially.
Come on, baby, light my fire.
Yeah.
Yes, Yoko. Yes.
Could you elaborate a little bit about the longitudinal wave frequency structure?
Well, that's simple. Golden ratio exponents of Planck. I'm done. Any other questions? Planck length and time. Really, that completely answers your question.
Frequency continuous.
Yes, but it's not continuous. No, it's discontinuous. It's discrete, quantized by Planck and golden ratio. Because golden ratio, we have the equations. Golden ratio is maximized constructive wave interference by equation. We were the first to prove that. Fractalfield.com/mathematics of fusion, we published that in the mathematics literature. It's called the Navier-Stokes and equations. And so, indeed, if you have golden ratio, you have maximized constructive wave interference. And what physics doesn't know is that is maximized compression. And maximized compression, solution to compression, is a solution to every problem that physics has ever known. Love-making is a solution to compression. Urban design is a solution to compression. History of computing is a solution to compression. Alchemy is a solution to compression. Fusion is a solution to compression. Surviving death is a solution. Everything we know of. If you want a solution to any problem we have, how to make it through death, the answer is the solution of perfect compression. Yes?
So in the physics literature, they say that phase conjugation is the same as four-way mixing.
Well,
And
it's introduction.
Right, right, and you said that accurately.
Yeah.
So that means you need 4 kissing cones, and you only have 2 in the theraphi. Therefore, the theraphi does not involve phase conjugation, correct?
No, actually, physics starts with, even in conventional physics, they start with 2 lasers. But then
Yes.
they make a phase conjugation, and then they bounce off a third one
third one.
at a non-cubic angle.
Yeah, well, so where's the third one? That's true. Where's the third one in the theraphi?
It's you,
It's,
Oh, it's not just, got it.
actually, in fact, if you get the 2 lasers coming together and you don't have the super high dielectric phase conjugate mirror, barium, strontium, titanate, you don't get any magic. And so you become that. And the higher your dielectric, the brighter the tubes. In fact, many of our therapists know that you watch the tubes to maximize brightness and you know the patient just relaxed and got healed.
So where's the barium titanate? You got 2
Bar-
opposing.
Well, Paul's answer is correct. Your body needs to get phase conjugate in order to implode that charge. And your body becomes the media, which is the phase conjugate mirror. Now, I didn't get to that part in the slides here about John Dee using a phase conjugate mirror, the famous crystal, and the phase conjugate mirror used by the tribes in South America. But this is how they would see into the future, quite literally. They knew how to build phase conjugate mirrors. Nostradamus, for example, he was in Italy and he did the research and he knew what coating to put under the water on the bottom of his scrying cup to make it a phase conjugate mirror. That's a true story. That's how Nostradamus learned. Yep.
I'm just trying to, a wave is not a thing. A wave is what something does. You can't say that I saw happiness on the street. You saw somebody smile, you saw somebody wave. Also, I'm just thinking with the speed of light, what if there was no such thing as a speed of light? What if it was simply a rate of induction?
Well, I think rate of induction is, the speed of light is clearly a threshold. And the speed of light it's standardized around the universe. But that threshold, like Planck, can be superseded if you conjugate. So, the speed of light is real, but it's not a speed limit. It's a threshold at which conversion is possible to make longitudinal, which is the only way through the speed of light. So that, physics said you would die, Einstein said you would die if you went through the speed of light. Actually, he was wrong. If you don't go through the speed of light, you are dead. But this is a long story. And I think we're out of time, actually. Or is Charles?
Well, we have a little 5-10 minute break.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. Blessing.